Hi, it's Susan and welcome to my channel. In the last video, I shared what I created in the first 4 days of August. All 4 of those entries were inspired by the color Ruby Red, which is part of a challenge that I'm doing with my painting community called Artful August. The second week of Artful August was inspired by the color Citrine Yellow. So in this video, I'm going to share with you what I did for the 5 weekdays of the second week of August. And I'll share with you some processes, some of the challenges and mishaps, but mostly the fun that I had exploring with this color as my inspiration. So if you're ready, let's dive in and I'll share with you what I did. One thing I've noticed about myself is that it's pretty easy for me to get in my head at the start of anything, which includes the start of a new week. Now that this is the start of a new week and a new color for Artful August, I don't know, it feels like I need to warm up, and a lot of times the warm up or that first entry is going to come out kind of wonky. And in this case, and for Artful August in general, I noticed this year and last year, what I try to do is follow the inspiration that first comes to me. And for this one, when I sat down, the first thing that came to me was, let me just try and do something based on crystal forms, because citrine is a crystal. And I thought maybe I can try and make some sort of abstract pattern. And that's where I just started. I feel like I've continued this week playing with my newish water-soluble wax pastel crayons. I'll leave a link to the swatching video for those here in case you're curious about them. But they're basically watercolor in the form of crayons, and they're really fun to play with. But I'm not exactly sure what I was thinking here, because crystals have, sharp edges and fine points. And crayons don't typically make those sort of marks, but I went with it anyway. I don't know, sometimes I just make marks and try to play, and this is what I ended up with. So because I wasn't satisfied from day one with my crystal inspired experiment, I decided to go for a larger scale crystal and make more of an intentional effort to render the crystals in a literal way. So really what it means is I'm going to try and draw slash paint this as a true crystal painting or a picture of a crystal. I found a picture of raw crystal, like a raw cut crystal, not a polished gem. And I think that actually made it harder, because raw crystals have a lot of faceting to them that's not intentional. They are natural. And I think in a gemstone, the faceting is manufactured and it's symmetrical, and light travels through them in a very specific way. The angles are very sharp. Whereas in a raw crystal, it's some places are soft, some places are sharp. The color changes a lot, and I think it's tricky to capture that in a looser way. Obviously, I know that there are people who can do this beautifully, and it just happens to not be me right now because I have very little practice doing it, and I think that there's value in trying it out, trying anything out. And that's what I was trying to do here. I was just trying to try this out, see what would happen, but try it with an intent of actually rendering this as something that you would recognize. So if you look at it, you'd say, oh, those are crystals. And I'm not quite confident enough to say that it actually worked. I think that it obviously is a little bit better in the sense of it looks like crystals versus the previous day's abstract version, which seems quite obvious to say because the first one I wasn't trying to draw crystals and make it look like crystals. It was just like an essence or a jumping off point for inspiration. But I don't know if this truly came out at all. But I did try to capture it in a looser way, meaning I'm not trying to do a hyper realistic painting where everything is accurate and it looks like the photograph. I was just trying to capture, the semblance of what this is supposed to be. And, my conclusion really after this is painting crystals in watercolor is really not that easy. I think it's going to take a lot more patience and a lot more time than I spent on this one. So by the third day, after the first 2 days, the first one really felt a little bit like, that didn't go the way I wanted it to. The second day was much more intense in the sense of intent. So it's intense because I had a lot of intent behind my painting. So on day 3, I decided to just have fun. And it was really all about play. I knew I was going to do something loose and abstract, and I knew I wanted to test out a new supply that I had actually bought more than 6 months before, and it's called Brusho. And I first found out about Brusho from a member of the painting community. And I mentioned this in the previous video, but I learn a lot and get a lot of new recommendations from inside our painting community. And I feel like they're all fun so far. And Brusho, from my basic understanding, is basically a watercolor pigment in crystal form. So even though the color actually on the bottle says gray, it's actually a powdered pigment that's made up of a mix of different crystallized pigment colors. So basically, when you add water to it, you can see a firework burst of different colors that when you mix those together or mix them into water, they become a homogeneous color that's labeled on the package. So basically, it's a bunch of different crystal colors, but when you mix them together, they become a gray. And I really thought that this was going to be fun to play with because of those little crystal colors. I wanted actually the crystals to show, like the crystals to separate and stay that way, but I used a lot of water and they ended up blending all together into a gray, which I don't mind, but this one was really fun. I got to use Brusho. I put on some salt for some texture, and I generally just played with this color that I thought was a really beautiful pairing. So I feel like this gray paired with this warm yellow was actually a really nice palette, and it wasn't intentional, but I really like how it turned out. And just in case you're curious about Brusho and you need a little bit more information right now because it sounds exciting, I'm going to show you this video of another test I did on a separate piece of paper. It's essentially just Brusho and clear water, and this is how it turned out. This is what I'm talking about when there's specks of different colors that mix to create the gray. So you can kind of see how they separated out here. I'm not a Brusho expert. This is literally the first time I used it. So if you search on YouTube for other videos, you can search for Brusho, and there's quite a few there. I did look, and there are quite a few artists that demonstrate what it is, and you can find out more information about them there. So as you know, probably by now, one of my things is to try to really encourage myself to just follow the first instincts. And I tend to do that. I tend to kind of keep my word to myself more often than not. And on this particular day, I didn't have any ideas for what I was going to do before I sat down. And I followed the first instinct I had. So I was on Instagram and I saw that my local farm was selling fresh squash blossoms. So they had this beautiful photo of them. And so I decided just to look up images of squash blossoms because I didn't have any real ones on hand. And I wasn't about to go to the farm to get them just to paint. But I did look up some images, found one that compositionally would work well in the space that I had, and I used that. And I feel like the color for this week's citrine yellow, citrine yellow can really range from a really light yellow. In some ways, it's almost light lemon yellow, and it could actually lean all the way towards an earthy yellow or even an ochre or brown. And for me, citrine yellow was bringing up a lot of warm yellows for me. So warm yellows and oranges. And I knew I wanted to make it sketchy. I knew I didn't want it to be ink and watercolor. And because I had been playing so much with the wax pastels recently, I decided I would sketch it, do wax pastels, and then it ended up changing into adding watercolor paint and then adding some colored pencil on top of it. And I feel like, executed the way that I wanted to, which was to keep it loose and sketchy. Here we are at day 5, and I don't have any video of this piece or the progress of this piece because I did it during a Zoom call where I was just hanging out with some of the members of the Paint With Me community. And it's some of those times where we get together and we're just co-creating or co-working on our paintings together. So whatever we want to be doing that day. And this is what came out. I don't tend to do really hard paintings, things that require a lot of concentration because I'm there chatting and connecting with other people, and I love it. It's fun, and I end up doing things like swatching or testing out colors I don't normally use and making pieces like this. So what I did decide to do was return to one particular color here and do a comparison with a color I normally use. So one of the colors I used that day, and you can see it written down on my sketch, is nickel azo yellow specifically. And I had a tube of it. I think I adopted it from somebody, and I just never used it. And this one I'm swatching right now is actually Hansa Yellow Medium. And the reason why I'm doing a comparison of the two is because Jane, who is a member, and I'll link her YouTube channel here for you too, but Jane, she actually says that she uses nickel azo instead of Hansa Yellow Medium in her palette because it has this really beautiful luminous quality to it. And I can see that. And so I wanted to swatch them side by side because I normally use Hansa Yellow Medium. And you can see here that nickel azo has much more of an earthy tone to it. But once you start to add water, if it's diluted out, it starts to become lighter and brighter. And in fact, at some point, looks very similar to Hansa Yellow Medium, which is really interesting to me. Now, I don't know how this reacts with a larger set of palette colors. I've never had it in my palette. So take what I'm saying with, just this limited information, but it is a really beautiful color. I know other artists use it in their palettes, and I just wanted to swatch it here so you could see as well kind of how they look side by side. So that concludes my 5 days of using citrine yellow as my inspiration inside of my Artful August sketchbook. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you got something out of it. Perhaps some information or a new supply or just inspiration to use citrine yellow as a jumping off point for your next entry or your next painting. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below and I'll make sure to try to answer it as best as I can. And I hope to see you in the next one.